Greetings, welcome, sharps, squares, newbies. It is another edition of the Parleh Sports Betting Show. I'm Jorey Middlestadt. My co-host and fellow bald man, Harley Redlick, otherwise known as the Professional, is alongside, and we're with you on a Thursday morning, a special edition, heading into a holiday weekend. Good morning, Harley.
How you doing, Jorey?
I'm good, thank you. We're here each and every week on Canada's Sports Betting Network, which is the Parleh. And let's tell you what's going to happen on this edition of the program. Well, it's week number 2 for live single game wagering in Ontario. We're going to talk about mainly Harley's experiences, mine as well, but more Harley. I know he'll have a rant or two. I can almost guarantee that.
Just one major rant.
Oh, just one major rant today?
It's all a major one, but it's only one.
We'll get to that, and that will be our gambling story of the week. And we're going to continue to not necessarily make it our top gambling story of the week, but given that there was only a few days of actual action when we were with you last week, we wanted to revisit, and it's something we're going to, keep our eye on, obviously, as we move along and hopefully see other provinces in this country open for business as well. Big week in basketball for obvious reasons as the playoffs get underway. Well, they're already underway, although they don't technically call it the playoffs. The play-in tournament will wrap up tomorrow night, where we'll find out the final 2 teams, the 8 seeds in both conferences. We know the other 6 series, and so we're going to preview them, break them down, hopefully find you some value bets along the way. There could be individual game bets as well as the series tip-off Saturday and Sunday. And we'll spend a little extra time on Canada's only team, that being the Raptors, as they take on the Philadelphia 76ers. We'll also have a betting concept for you this week, and that will be trends, which is a big part of sports wagering. And we're going to try and get through the weeds of what trends are complete nonsense and what are ones that you should be paying attention to. So we'll have a little discussion about that. And then we may have some other Major League Baseball picks for tonight. Tonight. You're going to try to avoid day games, right? If possible.
I mean, I advocate value when I see it. I understand the production time. My MLB value bet today, if you stick around for the whole show, I'm going to double check the time. I'm pretty sure it's the last game on the board. It is. It doesn't start till, well, it starts late enough that you have all day today to listen and get it in.
Right, because Thursdays often you'll find afternoon games, right? It's often a getaway day for Major League Baseball teams. So we're going to try and keep them to night when we are recording this on a morning, and on this occasion on a Thursday morning, as opposed to our usual Friday. So before we get to all that, as per usual, we need to recap what happened last week in terms of our picks. And Harley, after a couple losing weeks, was back to his winning ways. I wouldn't say you were breaking the bank, sir, but win is a win. And you had 2 Major League Baseball plays last week. The Tigers were a plus 123 dog to the Chicago White Sox. That gets the check mark. The Angels were a slight favorite, minus 106 over the Houston Astros. They got the X, but plus 123 and a minus 106 adds up to a little bit of profit. Math not being my strong suit, but that I can figure out. So congrats to you, Harley. Let's keep it going in terms of another winning week. Any comments just quickly on your picks from last week?
Splitting baseball bets slightly plus money is going to be a wheelhouse of mine. There's usually good value in taking small to medium-sized dogs in baseball. There's a lot of volatility, especially when, I mean, one of the best pitchers of all time is getting pulled after 80 pitches and being perfect after 7 innings. I mean, I don't think anybody else went even 6 innings yesterday. If the battle of the bullpens and you're getting plus 150, plus 160 on a regular basis, you're getting value. Be careful laying chalk, especially in baseball right now.
Only one pitcher thus far in all the games that have taken place has thrown 100 pitches, to my knowledge. I don't think that changed last night. Going into last night, one pitcher had gone 100. And the interesting part about, just quick aside with the Kershaw thing yesterday, is Kershaw had no problem with it, right? Like he wasn't begging to stay in. And if you saw any of his post-game comments, it was interesting. He said, look, man, like I didn't get over 75 pitches in spring training or a sim game. So to be at 80 pitches, he said he felt it was the right decision. I know there's been a lot of vitriol on social media, as there is with everything. That's no surprise, but certainly a lot of the old school ball players and media types were panning it, but Kershaw himself felt it was the right idea, as did his manager, Dave Roberts, who pulled him. And I guess there may be something to that, right? Because sometimes you got to take the long-term view. It's the first start of a season. And if he's not ready, right, to extend himself in terms of pitch count, I guess it makes sense. Any final thoughts?
I mean, I guess the perfect game part is very rare and tough to do. If Kershaw didn't have a problem with it, then it is what it is. There's pitch counts now. It's just the world we live in. So, I mean, just accept that there's good and bad with technology. There's good and bad with the ramifications of this stuff, and it is what it is.
And one final thing from last week, we don't want to overlook the fact that none of our Masters picks hit, although you were in there for quite a while. For a guy who knows nothing about golf, who picked a couple of medium range long shots in Joaquin Niemann and Shane Lowry. Lowry ended up finishing tied for third, but it was the Scotty Scheffler show. And right now on the PGA Tour, it's Scotty Scheffler's world and everybody else is living in it. That guy has made, how about this, Harley? We're not even halfway through the season. Mm-hmm. He has made $10.1 million in prize money in not even half the season, with 3 majors and tons of big money events to come. He is clearly the number 1 player in the world right now. And a final thought on the Masters. I didn't talk a lot about it going in, but it's something, golf's going to be going on through till, October, November. And we'll certainly talk more about golf for sure. And that is one of the things that I like to do, and I didn't do it really. I did one bet going in, and I should have talked about it, is betting the each way. Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not.
So an each way bet means you bet on a player to win the tournament, but there's a secondary bet. So you have to double the amount of your bet, but then you get 2 options. Option number 1 is the player to win at whatever odds, 10-1, 20-1, whatever it may be. And then the other option is usually, and you can play with it, is a top 5 finish or a top 10 finish. So you have 2 options in your bet. So if you're thinking, you want to play $2, you actually have to bet 4, but then you have both options. And the second option will pay, depending on that player's odds, anywhere from even money to plus 1.5-1, 2-1. And so it's a nice way to have an option, because obviously in many golf tournaments, right, Harley, there's 144 guys in the field. So to have an option to place top 10, top 5, top 20, good way to bet golf. We'll talk more about it as we move along, and it may enter into some of the picks that I make on golf going forward. All right. It's week number 2 with legal single game wagering and operating books other than the provincial book. So we're about 10 days in now. Mm-hmm. We talked last week about signups. Some were a little more complicated than others, and the bonuses were nothing to really write home about, right? Nothing knocked our socks off in terms of bonuses, especially in comparison to what we saw in the US with massive and crazy bonuses happening. So thoughts now after, a second week and a little more time to digest and see how the market's operating.
So my online experience this week is I'm having this problem with BetMGM and OLG. It's a long process to withdraw funds. With BetMGM, they said my bank was holding it. No clue who's at fault, but it's annoying to me. It took over 3 days. In their defense, their second withdrawal only took 18 hours, so it was better. And their customer service is excellent, reaching out in personal. A buddy said Score Bet was better within 30 hours, but to me, that's still too long.
What? Why? Why would it take 30 hours? Everything's electronic, right? Like that makes no sense.
The system they use with, I don't know, Gigadat, etc. For OLG, when I tried to withdraw, they asked for banking documentation, which took a few days to verify. Once confirmed, send an email that they are processing. And get ready for this. Once processed, which takes 2 days, I got an email. It says I can expect the funds within 5 days. So you add it all up, and OLG is taking 2 weeks. Now, in their defense, they did require a lot of documentation on sign up, and you couldn't bet right away. So maybe it's a weird government compliance thing. I heard follow-up withdrawals are quicker. They've always paid in the past. But 2 weeks to get your money out doesn't seem right. For the private operators, you sign up and fund like we know in minutes. So waiting even a day for a withdrawal to me is not cool. And I don't care if it's them or the bank.
Right.
To me,
well, I have a
Go
question
ahead.
then. I have a question then. Does it matter if when you sign up and deposit, does it matter if you use credit card, debit card? Like, does the method of deposit matter? Because if it's your debit or credit, why can't they just put it back on your card?
Great question. I'm not sure. With BetMGM, I had to use an e-transfer system. So I guess they e-transferred me back. Some of the other places I did use debits and credit cards just to play around with different systems. So I would assume, again, like you said, that should be instantaneous. But with OLG, there was no e-transfer and there's a 2-week process. And again, it's not right. To me, this is a retail product. Returning a sweatshirt at the Gap, canceling an online subscription to Netflix takes what? 1 minute? Yeah. With the private operators, and I don't think the private operators are doing anything wrong. BetMGM makes it clear withdrawal, they advertise in as fast as 8 hours, which was pretty much right the second time. But again, if deposits take 5 minutes, why can't withdrawals? I don't get the tech process. The truth is, I don't really care. I think this is on the regulators. I think this is on iGaming Ontario when it comes to the private operators. And there should be a simple moral rule. Ready for this? It should never be easier to deposit money than to withdraw money. The whole point of the regulated private market was consumer protection. That's iGaming Ontario's job. I don't want to feel like we're back in the gray market where getting your money online's easy and getting it out is a challenge. This is on the regulators to do better. I've met companies at some of these tech events and some of these gaming events that do instantaneous cash outs. Spend the money, get in touch, figure it out. But there's no way in hell that we needed to wait for the white kosher market run by iGaming Ontario with all this bureaucracy and consumer protection, only to go to a system where we're right back where we were, where it takes 5 minutes to get your money online and bet with a private operator, and you're lucky if it's 8 hours, and sometimes it's 24 or 72 hours to get your money out with the private operators. It's just not right.
I wish I was in a position that I could withdraw money because I was winning so much, but I haven't been there yet. So that's something we'll continue to talk about, monitor. And this is something, and one of the things that we want to hear from you, right? Our listeners, our viewers. Totally. Email us questions at theparleh.com or get in touch with us on social media at Jorey Middle, at Sharp Edge Picks. If you're watching, you're going to see our Twitter handles right there on the screen. If you're listening, again, at Jorey Middle, Jorey Middle, I'll spot you the middle, and at Sharp Edge Picks, which is easy to spell. So please tell us. We'll talk about it. We want to hear your experiences in every way, shape, and form in dealing with the different books that are now operating in Ontario. That just, you got to be able to get paid quickly. That just makes no sense to me. And again, that's something we want to continue to monitor and talk about. All right. The NBA playoffs are quasi underway. I don't know if the play-in tournament, they're calling it the play-in tournament. So, and to qualify for the playoffs. So 6 of the 8 series are set. Before we talk about those 6 series, There's still 2 more play-in games to decide the 8 seeds in either conference. Those will go tomorrow. The Cleveland Cavaliers host the Atlanta Hawks. Hawks, the road team, are a 2.5-point favorite for the lines that I looked at just before we came on. Total around 225. The other game is the Clippers hosting the New Orleans Pelicans. Clips, the home team, are a minus 4. They're a 4-point favorite. Total around 216.5. Any thoughts on those 2 games?
The Hawks are the only relatively healthy team of the 4. Cleveland's obviously struggled without Allen. They're a home dog. Atlanta looked great in the last game. In the second game, I mean, it looks like an exhibition game. There's no Zion. There's no Kawhi.
Pelicans have a nice – Pelicans, though, with the CJ McCollum trade, they've got a nice little squad. They've been pretty good since that trade. They're a bit of a – I mean, I don't know if I would call them a dangerous team to take out the Phoenix Suns if they advance, but I like what they've done with their team. And Jonas, former Raptor, Jonas Valanciunas is a beast. He's a handful and will be in the postseason.
Sure.
Okay. I like the Hawks. I think the Hawks are only in this situation because of health throughout the season, right? They had terrible injury issues all year long. Right? Were they not in the Eastern Conference final a year ago? Like, this is a better team, right? This is a better team than their record this year for a variety of reasons. And as you mentioned, the Cavs are beat up. There's an outside chance that Allen will play, but I don't think so. And even if he does, there's going to be a lot of rust. I like the Hawks personally. I think that's a good play tomorrow night.
If they advance, they won't be a huge dog in a 1-8 matchup versus the one seed in the East is the Heat, who, while they're good, aren't considered in the upper echelon. You're right. The Heat are hoping that Cleveland maybe pulls off an upset because Atlanta is a dangerous and scary team for them to have to play.
And it's funny you mentioned that. We're going to talk a little bit about futures, right? The odds to win the conference or the NBA championship. The Heat are the number 1 seed. They're not the favorite to win the East.
They're the 4th favorite. They're the 4th favorite on my list.
I think they were 3rd at the lines I was looking at this morning. Or 3rd anyway to win the NBA championship of the teams from the East. And I think they were either the 3rd or 4th choice to win the East, which is really interesting. And we'll touch upon that. First, though, let's talk about the 6 series that we know about. Prices are out. We know when the first games will take place. And I think most of the schedules are now in place. I would normally go in order, highest seed, right? Start with the number 2-7 matchup. But hey, we're in Toronto, right? We got only one Canadian team in the NBA. So let's talk about the Raps, the number 5 seed, and the number 4 seeded Philadelphia 76ers. These teams have played twice in the playoffs before, right? And both series came down to the last shot in Game 7. So if you're a Raptors fan, I don't know that you're rooting for that.
Yes, but you're definitely rooting for that. You're almost a 2-1 dog in the series. And if this game comes down to Siakam throwing up a shot for the win, whether it bounces out the way it did for Vince or bounces in the way it did for Kawhi, at the end of the day, the Raptors are just under a 2-1. The Raptors, if you look at it, are about 37% plus 160 net of VIG, 37% to win the series. The best price I found on the Raps to win the NBA championship was 65 to 1 FanDuel, 66 to 1 at BetMGM to win it all. There is respect for the Raptors when you think about the fact that the Sixers have the 2 biggest name superstars by far in the series, and they're at home. I like the Raptors. The Raptors, I actually took them in Game 1 on the parlay. The Raptors, hold
that thought before you get to the Game 1. I just wanted to say, because you were talking about line shopping, I did some as well. The range I found, I went to three different books. The Raps were from plus 145 to plus 165. So that's a pretty significant spread if you want a line shop. And on the Sixers side, the spread was only minus 175 to minus 185. So right,
from
we've
now
been
on,
talking about line shopping, and there's a discrepancy. You can get up to plus 165 on the Raps.
right, and as low as 175 on the Sixers. I think as a best practice, when I quote lines and I quote bets, I'm always going to quote where I find to be the best line, and I'm going to state it. The best line I found on the Raptors for game 1, and what I like is them plus right now. I mean, I bet them plus 5 on a video for the parlay a couple of days ago. There's actually been betting action on the Raptors, which is a lot of respect for them when the Sixers have the big names and they're at home to open the series. Best price right now is plus 4.5, minus only 105, not the standard 110. And you can get that at Betway on the Raptors. I like the Raps in game 1. They're a gritty team. They're playoff winners. Nurse is 23-14 lifetime in the playoffs. Doc is only 98-94 with some really good teams. We'll talk about trends later. To me, most of them are noise, but this one is important. You think about guys like Popovich or Riley. They prepared their teams. They rise to the occasion. Embiid and especially Harden are big-name superstars. They haven't had much playoff success. I'm happy to fade them, take the gritty team that plays the good defense, that's well-coached and disciplined to at least keep it close. I'm not a homer bettor. I think the Raptors plus 4.5 laying only minus 105 is a very good value bet.
And what about in the series? And before you answer, let me throw out a few thoughts on the series. Number 1, no Thibault for at least the games 3 and 4 in Toronto, talking about the good wing defender for the Sixers. He's unvaccinated. He will not make the trip to Toronto. Advantage Raptors. The big question for me, or big questions, are A, is Fred VanVleet really healthy? Right? He's missed. They sat him the last few games of the regular season. He's had knee issues pretty much since about midseason. And since the All-Star break, right, where Fred was an All-Star, his numbers have dropped considerably, especially from three-point land. I'm pretty sure this is correct. He's only shooting 29% from distance since the All-Star break. He has not been All-Star Freddie after the break. To me, that's a big concern because I think up to the All-Star break, he was the unequivocal leader of the team, and he still might be from a spiritual standpoint, if you will, and just on floor and off floor leader from a vocal standpoint as he took that mantle from Kyle Lowry. Since the All-Star break, Pascal Siakam has been the man. Without question, he's put up incredible numbers, and he's been an almost unstoppable force. So, can Pascal keep that going into the playoffs? I don't think there's any question he's going to have to if the Raptors are going to win this series. And then for me, the other wild card on the Philly side is James Harden with an asterisk for Tyrese Maxey. And I say that because Harden doesn't look like superstar James Harden. His playoff resume is pretty crappy. And so if we see the version of Harden that we've seen pretty much the last month, because when he first got to Philly after the trade, he was lights out for the first, I think, 3 games. Since then, he's been meh. And I'm not a big Harden guy personally. I'd love to see him flame out. And then what do the Sixers do with him? Ooh, that's a topic for another day. But if Harden is superstar Harden, the Raptors are in trouble. If he's what we've seen the last month, I think the Raptors have a good shot. And I think there's a little bit of value in the Raptors. I don't love the Raptors because OG also coming off injury and trying to get back in game shape. He's only played 1 game out of the last several, right? He played the season finale. So that's my little breakdown. I think there's a little bit of value in the Raps, but not something that I would, make a multi-unit play on. Where are you on the series?
It's a pass.
Okay.
The Sixers just have more talent and more superstars, and you're not even getting 2-1 on the Raptors. Again, the respect the sportsbooks have for the Raptors is insane. A stacked team with home court and superstars against who? Like the Raptors are literally a bunch of no names. And
I don't know about that. That's going a little far. They've got two guys that have been all-stars in Freddie and Pascal, right? They were part of a championship team. They have the potential. They have the likely or potential rookie of the year.
They're C-rated all-stars. I mean, we can name 20. Who's playing in the playoffs? Look, go up and down the rosters. They're not in a Celtics, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum kind of category. They sure as hell aren't in the Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, Greek freak category. Like, which stars are you comparing them to? I mean, they're not even Lowry and Butler. Like, which team? I mean, they're like DeRozan type stars in the Bulls. I mean, they just happen to have won a championship that was probably largely due to Kawhi, who's gone. I mean, I love the Raptors, and we all love them in Toronto. But if you look at that team on a piece of paper, it doesn't scare you. Do they play great D? Yes. And do they figure it out? Yes. But in a league where superstars shine, especially in the playoffs, and when you have home court and you tend to get the calls, and you have not just one, but the two best players in the series playing for you, and you're not even a 2-1 favorite, it's a lot of respect for what really is on paper a mediocre team that can really come together well.
I would argue that Pascal right now is the second best player in the series over James Harden. But from a name value, I agree. Harden is certainly above his status at this point. The other thing, you alluded to it before we move on from this one, is in my mind, they have a superstar coach. Nick Nurse is one of the very best, and I think he'll be a factor in this series. I don't expect the Sixers to walk over them. That's why I say I think there's a little bit of value, and I think it's going to be a pretty long series as long as, Anunoby and Fred are healthy enough to be themselves and be a factor in the series. All right.
I'm calling bullshit on your Harden Siakam little rant. If we just got a newsletter that announced that both Harden and Siakam are out for the series, most Toronto fans would be like, sweet, amazing. We'd rather take our chances without Harden and Siakam.
Again, I've from what I've seen from Harden over the last month, and I haven't watched a ton of Sixer games, but I've watched a few. I think Siakam is the better player at this very moment. So
I'm just telling you that
we agree to disagree.
Yeah, but I'm just telling you that the betting lines would agree with me, and the line would move closer to a pick 'em in the series, not as a 2-1.
Oh, I think if you took Siakam and Harden out, I think the Sixers would be a bigger favorite. I actually believe that.
Anyways, NBA futures. Let's start with this. With line shopping, just to give our listeners an idea of who the favorites are. The Phoenix Suns plus 275 at Betway. Again, I'm going to quote the best prices, are the favorite to win the NBA championship, and plus 275 at Betway is the best price you can get. It's followed by the Bucks plus 525. You can get that at ScoreBet. Followed by, and then there's a bunch of teams tight. The Celtics at 9-1 at Bet365. The Nets at 10-1 at PointsBet. The Warriors at 10-1 at BetMGM. The Heat at 10-1 at BetMGM. And then the Grizzlies at 14-1 at ScoreBet. So those are kind of where we start if we want to start talking about NBA futures. I don't know if you saw anything else, or I can pluck off a few kind of trends or thoughts I saw based on those NBA futures.
Well, I thought we were going to go into the rest of the series, but that's fine. You're calling it. No, it's okay. You call an audible. And to me, as I talked about a little bit earlier, what's super interesting to me is that the favorite to win the East, right, and win the NBA championship out of the East is the 3 seed, the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, they are the defending champs, right? And I don't have a problem with that, because now that they've got the pedigree, they had a bunch of injury issues this year. And remember, when you play 82 games and the difference between, 1 and 6 is 5 games in the standings, there's really not that big a difference between these teams, right? Isn't that obvious? A, by the way the odds are, and B, you have to factor in over 82 games, right? Guys are hurt. There's, scheduling things that factor in. So there really isn't that much to choose between these two teams. And that the Heat, the number 1 seed, are the third or fourth choice. to win the East. That's what struck me from the future. So is there value perhaps in a team like the Heat, who's the number 1 seed, but not, the shortest odds?
Part of it's a function of draws in the first round.
Right.
The Bucks got the good draw. The Bulls, of all the teams on the bottom half of the bracket, are rated the lowest by a considerable margin. The Raptors, neutral, would be a favorite over the Bulls. The Nets, who are the 7 and the Celtics have to deal with, would clearly be a favorite. And we talked a little bit about the Hawks, and they dealt with some injuries during the year, and they're a pretty strong team, and the Heat have to take them on. So if you add it all up, and amongst those top 4 favorites hosting, playing the Bulls in round 1 is by far the best. If you want to talk about series prices, I don't mind the Bulls, but they're like a 7-8-1 dog in that series. And every other first round series is less than 2-1. So it's no different than the March Madness brackets where, the 1 seed is advancing. I mean, the Bucks, it would be a huge upset if the Bucks get upset in round 1. Everybody else could be upset in round 1 by the lower seed, and nobody would blink in the East. And that's why the Bucks are the favorite in the East.
All right. So you haven't talked much about the West. And again, we'll quickly run through the other series in a moment. Any value to win the conference, win the championship at the futures you're looking at right now? Is there a team that you might pluck out of there?
I didn't like anything. I have a few series prices I like. I don't like betting futures. You got to be very careful betting futures because generally speaking, especially if you want to bet the underdogs, you're going to get more value rolling the money line dog after money line dog unless, and again, this is the same with March Madness, unless you think it's a bracket like Kansas where there's a fraud or two in there and there's going to be some upsets. So for example, if you like the Denver Nuggets to run the table and win the championship, they're about 35-1. You will get better odds rolling them in all 4 series. I mean, they're a 2-1 dog in the first series. For them to win 4 series, they're going to be a dog a few times. You're better off rolling the money. Unless you think a team like Phoenix is a fraud, because clearly if instead of playing Phoenix, they got to play a non-Kawhi Clippers team and they got to host in the Western Conference Finals or something like that happened that threw things for a loop, then the futures would work. I didn't see any of those. So there are some series prices I like that we could talk about. We could talk a little bit about the NBA futures in general. There were a few observations I had, but there's no value bets to me for the futures.
All right, so let's get back to the series then. We started in the East. We talked about the Raps and Sixers. You did not have a play on the series, but you liked the Raptors in game 1, and you explained why. The Celtics are the 2 seed, and you were talking about the luck of the draw. Not that there's luck, but they get the Brooklyn Nets, right? I mean, what a first-round matchup, because we all know the Nets are not really a 7 seed. Injuries, again, just derailed their season, plus Kyrie's vaccination status, and I can go on and on. I didn't see a big variance line shopping in the series price in this one. The range on the Celtics was -140 to -145 among 3 different books. And if you want the Nets, it's +115 to 125. Obviously, the Nets are getting a ton of respect. What are your thoughts?
This is one of the weirdest lines you're ever going to see, especially yesterday. The market largely adjusted. As of yesterday at FanDuel, the Celtics, like you said, were -140, and they were the favorite to win the series. But the Nets were 6-1 to win the championship, and the Celtics were 12-1.
Yeah.
Now, there are a bunch of explanations for this and what the market is telling you. One is obvious. There's the injury to Ben Simmons. So he's expected back later in the playoffs. So obviously the market is telling you that we think Simmons is going to come back, and without him, they're not as good, but with him, they'll be better. So that's why they think in subsequent rounds, the Nets kind of value goes up relative to the Celtics. Number 2, the books have a ton of liability on the Nets because people hammered the Nets because they thought they were unstoppable. So if they can rip you off a little bit more on the Nets and give you a little bit of quote unquote value somewhere else to balance their action, they're more than happy to do that. The third thing is it's just an optics thing where people like to bet the Nets to win the championship. But when you're looking at the series, you're like, wait a second. The Celtics are at home, and they're a really good team. And given the Nets' body of work, maybe the Celtics should be a small favorite. So that's the market reaction, and it's largely adjusted. The Celtics and Nets are similar prices now. They're both around the 10-1 range to win the championship. The lines are about right. To be a 2 seed and have to play that Nets team sucks for Boston. It is a bad break and a draw, and nobody kind of really wanted that draw. If you look at the last day of the season, I think the Milwaukee Bucks lost on purpose to avoid that draw. The Celtics couldn't afford to lose, because had the Celtics lost that game, they would have fallen to the 4 seed. And had they been the 4 seed, they would have had to play Toronto. And I think it's well known that Jason Tatum is not vaccinated, and losing him for 3 games would have sucked. So instead, they got to play Kyrie and Durant as a 7 seed. And
They really,
Good
the
luck.
Celtics are, I think they were the number 1 or certainly in the top 3 defensive teams in the league. But they've been without their starting center, Robert Williams. He may come back in this series. He won't be there to start, but he may come back, and that's somebody that they would really like to get back into the lineup as soon as possible, right? For rim protection, especially the way they get to the hoop. Kyrie and KD. I don't have it. I mean, I actually think there's a little bit of value on the Celtics in this series, because I think they actually might be the better team, because the Nets lack depth, but I'm not making a play. Are you?
No, pass.
Okay. The other East series, the number 3 seeded Milwaukee Bucks, the defending NBA champs, taking on the number 6 seed, the Chicago Bulls. And you mentioned it. I mean, the Bucks are a massive favorite. Not a huge range in the line shopping I did, anywhere from minus 1,100 to minus 1,200. The Bulls range was plus 700 to plus 750. If you think the Bulls have a chance, and remember, no Lonzo Ball, he's out for the rest of the season. Is there a play here, or do the Bulls have no chance?
The Bulls, to me, plus 750 at Score Bet, are one of my 3 series value bets. They're the biggest long shot I'm taking. It smells good to me because it smells bad and funny. DeRozan has a history of choking or not showing up in the playoffs, but this is one of the few times where he really gets to show up with no pressure on him. He's expected to lose, and he's gritty and he's good. I like teams that start strong and then almost cool off near the end of the season, because they tend to be less liked and less valued. So they look uglier than their record, which to me makes them more attractive. I'm by no means suggesting that the Bulls win this series, but the Bulls have to win this series 1 in 8 times to get good value at 7.5 to 1. And I can see that happening in the NBA. I would take a shot with the Bulls.
All right, let's move to the West. And yeah, plus 750 might be worth a little bit of something as well. Again, health derailed the Bulls, right? Who at one point they were the top seed in the East for a while. So maybe they can recapture the magic. No Ball, I think, does hurt in a big way. All right, over to the West. We'll go top down. Obviously, we don't know who the Suns are playing, so we can't really talk about that. The 2 seed and the team, I think, that really took by far the biggest leap this year. The fact that they're a 2 seed is pretty shocking to a lot of fans. And that's the Memphis Grizzlies, who are taking on the number 7 seeded Minnesota Timberwolves, who won their play-in game and celebrated like they won the NBA title, which I don't think says a lot for their, I think it's kind of a we're happy to be here kind of situation. The price ranges that I saw on the Grizzlies were minus 320 to minus 380. So a bit of a spread there. Timberwolves from plus 260 to plus 300. Thoughts?
The T-Wolves are my second value bet, plus 300. The price I saw was at bet 365. The Wolves finished strong. The Wolves have star power. The Grizzlies are unproven. You add it up, and the Wolves winning the series 1 in 4 times, I think they got a better than 25% chance to win this series, given they got Cat, given they got a solid team. I'm not taking anything away from Memphis or what they accomplished, and they had a great season, obviously. But when you're new to the dance, to be expected to win a series more than 75% of the time, I mean, these guys are both newbies to the playoffs.
I was going to say, right, there's no experience really on either side for the most part.
Right. And like I always say, why do you take dogs? Volatility is your friend. You don't know who's going to show up and who doesn't show up. And I mean, if Memphis looks amazing and knocks out the Wolves in 4 or 5 games, no problem. But if the Wolves pull off the upset, I think it's happening more than 25% of the time. And I like the Wolves at 3-1.
And again, John Morant missed most of the last month. He did come back and play, I think, in 2 of their 3 final games and looked fine. Actually, the team played well without him, but the playoffs, we all know, is a different animal. And you need when you need buckets, you need your superstar or your top dogs to get those buckets and get stops from your better defenders. So, I don't disagree. I think that, again, I didn't like the way the T-Wolves celebrated. Not because they shouldn't celebrate or anything like that. It just seemed a little over the top for just winning a play-in game. Having said that, I don't disagree with you. I think there's a little bit of value in the Wolves. Now we get into some intriguing matchups where injuries are a huge factor, especially in the last one. But first, it's the number 3 Golden State Warriors taking on the number 6 Denver Nuggets. The price ranges I saw on the Warriors were -220 to -250. And on the Nuggets, +180 to +205. So bit of a discrepancy there. Steph Curry's status for the Warriors as of right now is unknown for game 1. I looked late last night. The Warriors were saying that he's progressing nicely, right, from the injured foot, but they had nothing to say about his status. And on the other side, Jamal Murray for the Nuggets, the Canadian, their fine point guard who hasn't played at all this year, he may actually suit up for game 1. Now, what are the expectations for a guy who hasn't seen the floor all year? I can't imagine that, they'd be that high, A, and B, how many minutes can go and how effective can he be? But that would be a huge boost if they did get Murray. And don't forget, they're without Porter Jr. as well, who's been out for most of the year. And that's why the Nuggets are a 6 seed. So any pick here?
Yeah. The Nuggets +205, FanDuel's price.
Yeah, I saw it at FanDuel. Yeah.
It is exceptionally rare in the NBA playoffs to get better than 2-1 on your money in a series where you have who's clearly the best player in the series. Jokic is the best player in the series, and you're getting better than 2-1 on the Nuggets. I'll take my chances. I think it's a good play.
Okay. Which leaves one more series. And again, injuries, a big factor here. The number 4 Dallas Mavericks taking on the number 5 Utah Jazz. And the injury I'm talking about is Luka Doncic. Again, his status is unknown as of late last night. And I didn't see anything new this morning. He is unlikely to go in game 1. As a result, they're the home team. They're the higher seed. They're a big dog. Range of prices from +235 to +250. And on the Jazz, -290 to -310. So not a huge difference. But again, you can line shop and find a little value. I'm guessing that you said you had 3 value series plays. So this is, and you've already given us 3. So you don't really have any a strong move one way or the other on this series.
No, but the market is definitely telling you that Luka is unlikely to play in this series, or if he does play, that he's going to be severely limited. If you're a medical expert out there and for some reason you think Luka's coming back sometime soon and is healthy to play, The Mavs are a great value play. The market is building in that Luka ain't playing in this series. It's too bad. The matchup would have been great. It'll still be okay. You never have to, don't count out a team necessarily because their superstar is out. But you're right. I already gave my 3 series value plays. Again, the dogs I liked were the T-Wolves plus 300 at Bet365, the Nuggets plus 205 at FanDuel, the Bulls plus 750 at the Score. I bet 1 unit on the Bulls, 2 units on the T-Wolves, 3 units on the Nuggets. Any single winner is a 35% return. Again, I think the Wolves finish strong and the Grizzlies are unproven. The Nuggets are better than 2-1 in a playoff series where they have clearly the best player. And the Bulls are a good long shot value play. Just I feel like DeRozan has the ability to step it up now that there's no pressure on him. I'm really excited for this NBA playoffs this year. It's the first time in I don't even know how long where if I gave you the top 2 picks and I got the field, I'm getting the edge. I mean, for years and years and years, the 1 seeds were overwhelming favorites to meet and play in the NBA finals. And it's amazing that there's more parity in the league and there's more excitement. And a round 1, game 7, 3, 6, or 4, 5 matchup, that winner could then go on and win the NBA championship. And that hasn't really been the case for 40 years. They were overwhelming favorites. So I'm excited about that.
Give me the units again. The Bulls were how many units?
The Bulls are 1 unit. The T-Wolves are 2 units. And the Nuggets are 3 units. It's just kind of laddering the bets just because of the prices on them. So you get similar payouts and returns.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that I had that and that you repeated it because you did it a little quickly and people are going to follow you. We want to make sure they understand. And again, units means you're going to bet the least amount on the Bulls, twice as much that you would bet on the Bulls on the T-Wolves, and 3 times as much on the Denver Nuggets. Right?
We talked a little bit about unit betting.
Yep.
We should add it to a future show just to talk about bankroll management. If you're betting $100 on a game, you definitely shouldn't be betting $100 on a future that pays 7 or 8 to 1, whether it's a quarter of your bet size or some ratio in that range is probably correct.
Yeah, we did talk about it on a previous show and we will revisit it. And so before we leave the NBA, do you have any plays for game 1 aside from the Raptors and Sixers?
No.
Oh, no other game 1 plays at all?
No other game 1 plays at all. I selectively value bet. I prefer to bet series than games, so you can get a feel of some of the teams I like based on who I bet in the series is. But the beauty of the series bets versus the game bets, usually if there's a play you like, is that you get to ride out a series. There's less volatility than in an individual game. So if there is a lean you like, I usually like the series. I like the Raptors more in game 1 than in the series because I think the Sixers star power will take over, but they might be jittery. Nurse has everybody prepared. So I think they're in better relative value shape for game 1.
So that'll wrap up our look at the NBA playoffs and the game 1 matchups. The only play Harley had for the game 1 NBA playoff series was the Raps against the Sixers, correct? And I don't even know, did you talk about the line? I think it was 4.5 or it was 5? You bet it at 5 a couple days ago and now it's moved?
Correct. I got him as good as +5 when I did the parlay video. For the purposes of this podcast, I'm still taking them +4.5, -105 at Betway.
At Betway. And again, we always remind you, please line shop. Our betting concept this week is something that we've teased a couple times and didn't get to it, but we want to get to it now. And that concept is trends. And if you read up, you're looking for information to make plays on all kinds of different sites, and that's everywhere. You will see what we call trends. So what is a trend? And I know from experience, they're huge in the NFL, but they've made their way into handicapping for all sports. But like in the NFL, you'll see something like, and I'm just making this one up, but it's certainly something that you might see. Like the Cowboys haven't beaten the Dolphins since 2001, right? They're 0-5 or 0-6 in that time frame. Well, To me, that's a stupid, silly trend that has no bearing on anything. They're in different conferences. So for the most part, they're only playing every 4 years. And in that time frame in the NFL, half your roster changes over. So there's really there's nothing of value to take from a trend like that. Okay. So having said that, what are the type of trends that you do pay attention to when you're handicapping?
So I agree with you. 99% of the trends are BS. Talk radio that goes 24/7. When you have to analyze every single game for a half an hour on air in dead air time, you have to talk about the fact that a team is 3-1 in their last 4 road games, as if that makes them an amazing road team as opposed to one puck bounce or baseball bounce or whatever. There's very few trends I care about. I'll talk about 2 of them that came up recently or that I thought about, and you can ask me for future ones if I really pay attention. For the most part, I don't. We talked about Nick Nurse going 23-14 in the playoffs compared to Doc Rivers being up about 598 and 94. To me, that's meaningful. It's a big N. It's playoff games, and there are certain coaches, again, I talked about guys like Popovich and Riley, who rise to the occasion, who prepare their teams well. So that to me is already a substantial and it makes sense in that environment. The one NFL trend they talk about that I kind of always liked was Andy Reid. Andy Reid is 19-3 coming off
the bye
as a head coach.
Right.
Most of the trends sound like BS. Sometimes you take a step back and you say, you know what? Maybe he's got a different approach than the other coaches. Maybe whether he lets them rest more or he lets them rest less. Most of this stuff is noise, but every so often you see one, and it's up to you to evaluate it if you think they have any value. I want to make something crystal clear. Line makers put zero emphasis on trends. They don't care about trends. The only thing they might care about trend-wise are things like second of a back-to-back where half of your team is exhausted. That's real. That's not a trend where the Blue Jays do better in night games than day games or when the dome is closed versus open, because you're just running some form of regression analysis on 1,000 different variables and one is slightly significant and you get fake all excited about it. If you're talking about something real, that's a whole different conversation. Like I said, on the back-to-backs on the roads, we talked a little bit about the fact that when the Heat and the Magic first started in the NBA, there were a lot of back-to-backs where night one was in Miami. Both the Heat and the Magic stunk. You'd crush the Heat, then you'd party in South Beach, and you'd be hungover to play the Magic. That's real. The trends, I think, for the most part that we're talking about here that I wouldn't pay attention to are the ones where a baseball team is 1-7 in their last 8 games on artificial turf, but they only play on artificial turf twice a year. So, I mean, no.
So a couple things then in a general sense when you're looking at trends. One, body of work / sample size, right?
Correct.
You need a little bit of depth to it.
A lot of depth to it.
Right. That's very important. And I'm glad. It's so funny because one of the things I wrote down to ask you about as a trend that you might pay attention to was like in the NHL or NBA back-to-back, or 3 and 4 night scenarios. I think there can be some value to that. But again, you can't look at it just in a very small sample size. Look at it not over like 10 years per se, because again, you got, right, rosters change and those kind of things are important. But I like the fact that you pointed that out. We're obviously early on in baseball season. Do you ever look at things like home road splits for pitchers? Especially like in a situation with like the Rockies, right, where you're playing at altitude, and we've heard all about how some guys hit way better at home when they play for the Rockies than they do on the road. Like, do you pay attention to stuff like that?
I mean, you got to be careful unless you really understand why it is that one guy, maybe he's got ball flight or something like that, and maybe it would translate well for a prop. I mean, clearly strikeout pitchers on the road are going to do relatively better than fly ball pitchers in Colorado. And if you can figure that out, I think that's real. If the trends make sense or there's a betting scenario that makes sense, go with it. But for the most part, it's just trying to fill up dead air time with talking about a game as if there's a betting trend.
Or copy space, right? Where you have to have a certain number of words in your written story. Mm-hmm. Same idea. Yeah, exactly. I'm with you. 90% of it is irrelevant, but there is 10% where trends should or could or should factor into your handicapping. And that was something we want to talk about, and we'll continue to, especially when NFL season comes up, because you see the handicapping. There's a million of those kinds of things that you will see when people are handicapping NFL games, because again, right, you only play once a week. So there's a lot to talk about for 6 days between games. Before we go, always MLB's busy every day. And so normally we come to you on Friday. Again, today we're with you on Thursday morning, and I'll send good wishes before we go. But any Major League Baseball plays for today?
Yeah, I like the Cincinnati Reds plus 1.5 runs, plus 110 at the Dodgers. You can get that price right now at BetMGM, Betway, or PointsBet. If you want to wait, maybe you can line shop and get a little higher, closer to game time. Again, baseball plus 1.5 means if the team wins the game or loses by a run, you're the winner. And I'm still getting plus 110 because the Cincinnati Reds are obviously a pretty big underdog at the Dodgers and Walker Buehler. I like getting road teams in general plus 1.5 runs in baseball. It's huge. Home teams don't bat in the bottom of the ninth when they're winning. So the game's done if they're leading after 8 and they don't get a chance to tack on an insurance run or the empty net goal equivalent in baseball. Also in baseball, the strategy changes. If it's a close game or a tied game, going into the bottom of the 7th and especially the bottom of the 8th, the Dodgers play small ball going for 1 run. The goal is not to crush your opponents. It's just to notch the win. Think about the Dodgers. They just pulled Kershaw yesterday during a perfect game. Buehler ain't lasting long. Getting to battle of the bullpens is always good. Plus 1.5 runs. It's a good spot. I like the value play. I like the Cincinnati Reds plus 1.5, plus 110 at the Dodgers.
Do you factor in like the bruised ego factor here where they almost, were subject to a perfect game yesterday? Right? Like a team that gets no hit or something like that, they almost always bounce back the next night because they've been embarrassed.
Right. That didn't go into my play. I think the Dodgers generally tend to be overvalued. I mean, the Dodgers are awesome, but the prices are insane. And are they going to win 60 to 65% of their games? Yes. But once you factor in how many games they're going to win by 1 run, especially at home, I don't think that they're winning by 2 or more today, more than 50% of the time. So if you're getting plus 110, the returns are good.
All right. Well, as I mentioned, we're recording on a Thursday morning because tomorrow is Good Friday. So for all those celebrating, we wish you a happy Easter. And those celebrating a happy Passover. We will be back with you in our regular time and date next Friday for another edition of the program. And so we'll remind you again, send us your comments, your picks, especially your experiences. If you're new or an experienced sports bettor, with everything going on, legal wagering in Ontario with multiple books. We want to hear all about that, withdrawing funds, depositing funds, signups, all of it. Email us, questions@theparleh.com, or reach out to either one of us on social media, in particular on Twitter. I'm at Jorey Middle. He's at Sharp Edge Picks. And on social media, always use the hashtag ParlehSBS. And so, for Harley, I'm Jorey. May all your picks be winners. Ours too. Enjoy the beginning of the NBA playoffs and a busy weekend of sports, a long weekend for many. And as I said, we'll be back with you for another edition of the Parleh Sports Betting Show on Canada's Sports Betting Network, the Parleh, next week. Enjoy. Any parting thoughts, Harley?
Enjoy the long weekend. There's a lot of NBA playoffs. The weather should be pretty good in Toronto, a lot better than it is in Winnipeg. Enjoy.
Thanks. Talk to you next week, guys.